All right, friends, welcome. A formal welcome to Daily Power Parsha. Today is January 27, 2021. It is a Wednesday, so we're going to focus on the fourth reading of the Torah portion of Beshalach. So this Torah portion, as you know, is talking about the splitting of the sea. So this is after the Exodus. Jewish people they're free, allegedly, but as we discussed yesterday, it's not so simple. Even after you bounce out of Egypt, sometimes you turn around and realize that it's not easy to get rid of the Pharaoh inside. So this is where step 2 happens, kind of like getting rid of the Egypt from within. And in this case, it's the idea of seeing the sea split and seeing the Egyptians collapse under the sea, kind of like totally getting out of that space of inner subjugation. Yesterday, also, we spoke about one of the mystical themes of the splitting of the sea, the idea that the sea represents a spiritual dimension, land represents a physical dimension, and what we're doing is, with the splitting of the sea, which we're meant to be doing on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, is to open ourselves up to a deeper reality and to expose the soul, expose the divine within and also without, so that we can have a bit of a deeper insight. Okay, here we go.
Rabbi?
Donna, yeah.
So that made me think yesterday, it reminded me of the Rosh Hodesh that Leah presented about you could be going along in your life and thinking you're on a mission, then all of a sudden your mission changes.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. Exactly. We have to, so I think I mentioned this, I don't know if it was yesterday or a few days ago, the idea that, sometimes we wait for signs to point us in the right direction, but it's hard to know whether something that happens is a sign to redirect or a sign to push through, right? How do you know, right? If you're walking on a path that you believe is your path, whatever that is, I want to keep it vague because it's, I want to keep it open-ended. You feel like this is your path, this is your mission, and then you encounter an obstruction. So here's the question: does it mean, all right, it's a sign I'm meant to be somewhere else, right? Or it's a challenge that I'm meant to push through and overcome? If only we knew the answers, if only we had the clarity. I think the challenge with life is all the time, is not only is it hard to do the work, whatever that is, but it's also hard sometimes to know what work we're supposed to be doing. So back in the day, you could go to, the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe, Tzaddik Rebbe, and say, what's my mission in life? And you can get that charted out. Yeah, if you find someone, great to do that today, but it's a little bit more difficult. And sometimes we have to trust our own intuition, then our own soul, and we have to pray, and hopefully we have that clarity, that direction. But I think for all of us, we've all had those moments where, we're waiting for some sort of sign, and it seems like maybe a road is closing, a path is closing down. And then our question is, so what do we do now? Keep on pushing or go around the obstruction? Clearly in our Torah portion, the message is keep on going, right? Don't turn around, don't redirect, keep on going. But there's a sea, we're gonna drown. Keep on going, don't worry. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna split, keep on going. All right, so the Jews, just picking up the narrative. The Jews have gone through the water. Now, gone through dry land in midst of the water. As we said, they didn't cross the sea. They made a shoehorn. They made a U in and out of the sea, coming back out on the same side that they had entered, right? They didn't cross it. They horseshoed it. Well, let's continue. Thereupon, so this is Exodus chapter 14, verse 26. That's where we pick up the story today. Thereupon the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, This is the second time he's doing that. The first time to split it, this time to collapse it. And let the water return upon the Egyptians, upon the chariots, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. This is where the sea collapses. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and toward morning, the sea returned to its strength, as the Egyptians were fleeing toward it. And the Lord stirred the Egyptians into the sea. This sentence, this verse has so much commentary and so many insights. I want to share that with you right now. So what happens is, again, Moses stretches his hand with the staff over the sea. And in the morning, so they crossed the sea all night. And in the morning, when he did this, the sea returned back to its strength, which means instead of being split, it collapsed back to normal. Now, this word, return to its strength, specifically strength, is unusual. And I'm going to speak about that in a moment, what that means on a deeper level. But on a simple level, it means that the sea collapses back to its normal state. And this happens as the Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord stirred the Egyptians into the sea. The idea that it wasn't just collapsing, but it was picking them up and putting them down. It was a volatile experience. But the word here that I want to focus on first is to its strength. The sea returned to its strength. In the Hebrew, if you could follow me in the Hebrew side, I just highlighted the Hebrew word. It's le'etano, to its strength. What's interesting is that our sages say that although literally it means to its strength, on a deeper level, le'etano can also mean letenao, which is a different word, which means to, if you rearrange the letters, let me just clarify, if you rearrange the letters, you change the word from being to its strength and being to its condition. I don't mean the normal condition of the sea being collapsed, being a sea. I mean a condition like when you make a contract that has a condition. You know what I'm talking about? A condition like a stipulation. So this leads our sages to say the following unbelievable idea. When God created the sea, the beginning of creation, right? God created the sea and God created dry land. When God created the sea, God made a condition, a tanai, a stipulation, right? God made a deal with the sea. You're going to be the sea, and you're going to have whatever you need to be, your best sea, right? Whatever that is. But there's one condition. The condition is that when the children of Israel need to go through the water, you're going to suspend your nature in order to facilitate safe passage. That is the deal. That was the deal that was set with the sea from the beginning. I want to see if Rashi does not mention this, but it's definitely mentioned in other commentaries, the Medrash, and other places. Again, the idea here is that there was a deal made with the sea from the beginning of creation, that it was meant and it agreed to, so to speak, to split for the children of Israel at the time. But let's go a little bit deeper. There's another source that says that when the sea split, when the sea split and then collapsed upon the Egyptians, the angels complained to God. What was the complaint? The angel said, how is this just? How is this right? These are idol worshipers, and these are idol worshipers. So when the Jews were in Egypt for hundreds of years, at some point, they picked up some of the pagan idolatrous rituals of the Egyptians. This is, although I mentioned at the beginning of the book of Exodus that the Jews never changed their language, their clothing, or their names. They kept Jewish names, they kept Jewish Hebrew, Jewish language, and they also kept Jewish ways of dress. Nonetheless, there were some idolatrous or pagan practices that kind of bled into the Jewish community, the Jewish experience. And so the angels, at this time of the splitting of the sea, the angels said to God, how is this right? You're going to save these people and destroy those people, wipe those people. These are idol worshippers, and those are idol worshippers. They're all steeped in the same thing. So essentially, there were certain mitzvot, certain special good deeds, if you will, that spared the Jewish people, the good deeds that they got in Egypt and future good deeds. But you should know, I'm just mentioning this to fill out the picture, that it wasn't so simple about splitting of the sea. God had to call in the condition that was originally done, and God had to contend with the challenge of the angels about the righteousness of the Jewish people at that point. Let's continue inside with the narrative. So the sea begins to collapse, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire force of Pharaoh coming after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. Well, all right. According to some tradition, Jewish tradition, there was one person that survived. So it says not one that survived amongst the soldiers, the force of Pharaoh. But there was one that survived, and that is, according to tradition, according to at least one opinion in our tradition, Pharaoh himself survived this. Pharaoh himself survived. I think I mentioned before in a previous class at a previous time in a different context that the story of Jonah that we read about on Yom Kippur, remember the story of Jonah, the guy, the Jewish prophet who God says to go to Nineveh, this other city, and warn the people that God is going to destroy them if they don't get their act together. And Jonah doesn't want to go, and we explain because Nineveh was actually an enemy of the Jewish people and trying to destroy the Jewish people, so he didn't want to aid and abet the enemy. Anyway, the king of Nineveh, again, according to one tradition, is none other than Pharaoh himself, who survived this experience. You might wonder, how is it fair? How is it right that all of the people, all of the soldiers, everyone else perishes? I mean, not everyone, but many perish. But Pharaoh, who's the cause of all the problems, he survives. How is that fair? How is that right? If anyone should go, if anyone should meet kind of this ultimate punishment, it would be Pharaoh. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, but I'm just sharing with you the tradition. I'm sure there is an answer and it is discussed. I have the question. I don't have necessarily an answer. Maybe you have an answer, but it's something to think about and bear in mind as we go through the story. I'm just sharing with you different ideas within the tradition. Let's continue verse 29. At any point, by the way, jump in if you have a question or a clarification, comment, etc. Okay. Hey, Mark. All right, verse 29. But the children of Israel, even as the water was collapsing for the Egyptians, but the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And the water was to them, like a wall, like a choma, like a wall from their right and from their left, right? The water was the walls of water, right and left. By the way, according to a tradition, so the wall on the right and the wall on the left are referring to different mitzvot, which again talks about the merit in which they were saved. I forget which mitzvot typically are stated, maybe Torah study and prayer or something like that, one on the right, one on the left. But certain mitzvot, either the ones that they did or the ones that they would do in the future, stood for them as protective barriers in the raging. Well, I don't know if he's rage, but I guess any water held back, it's going to rage at some point. It's going to have that nature. Verse 30. On that day, this was 1 week following the Exodus. 7 days later, on that day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dying on the seashore. Let's continue. Verse 31. And Israel saw the great hand which the Lord had used upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in Moses, his servant. So a few things here. Number one, they saw the great hand. This is not something that they were told about, something that they experienced kind of from an arm's length distance. This is something that they literally walked through and saw the Egyptians drown in the sea. So this is, they saw it and they fear the Lord. And that means obviously I explained Sunday, fear, the idea of fearing God. It doesn't mean that you're afraid of God, but it means that you're in awe, respect, right? Even today, I will tell you, you got to respect the sea, right? You got to not fear the sea, respect the sea. The sea could be dangerous. This is not talking about fearing the sea or respecting the sea. This is talking about God, but in the context of what happened with the sea. And they believed, this last line is also powerful. They believed in God and in Moses. Now, believing in God makes sense. Believing in Moses? Are we equating a human being with God? We shouldn't misconstrue this as elevating Moses to divine status. It means they believed in God and they believed in Moses, his servant, right? They didn't elevate Moses to divine status, but Moses was servant status. Moses was the conduit. Moses was the messenger. Moses was the pure transmitter of the divine communication, divine will, divine action, etc. That's why Moses is great and is the greatest Jewish leader of all time. Why? Because he didn't get in the way. Any leader, this is a general idea about leadership. A leader that gets, at least from a Jewish perspective, that gets in the way, right, makes it about themselves, takes it away from the cause. Takes away from the cause. So in the context of Judaism, in the context of our connection as individuals with God, the greatest thing that Moses can do as a leader is to facilitate a connection, but get out of the way. It's not about Moses. I mentioned this before in other classes. I'll mention it again. There's one name that is pretty much not mentioned in the Haggadah on Passover at the Seder. You open up your Maxwell House or whatever it is, or whatever edition that you use, open up your Haggadah, you'll find there's no mention of Moses. Okay, the truth is there's one mention of Moses, but it's in the context of a verse. I believe actually it's this verse. Believe in the Lord and Moses' servant. I believe it's this verse that we quote because of the context of the Exodus and the salvation. I believe we quote this verse. That's the only time this is mentioned. It's almost incidental because it's part of the verse. But we don't make a big deal about Moses at the Seder. And the reason is because it was never about Moses. Moses never made it about Moses. If Moses said, by the way, guys, I'm Moses. Yeah, remember the sea split? That was me with my staff. If that ever happened, beware. If a leader makes it about themselves, always be wary. Always be wary. In general, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, tells us to be wary of leadership, right? Just be wary of those in power. They'll befriend you when they need it, but when you need it, it might not be around. That's what it says. And maybe it sounds a little cynical, but I think it's somewhat of an honest take. Again, not everyone is the same. Not every context is the same. But again, I just want to emphasize that although on the surface, it could seem like this verse is equating God and Moses. Oh, so Moses is divine, Moses is godlike. In truth, it's actually the opposite. It's Moses as servant. And when Moses is God's servant, which is the idea of surrender and transparency and not getting in the way, that's the true greatness of Moses. It's that he didn't get in the way. He didn't interrupt the connection or say that you need to go through me to get to God. It was never about that. The true leader is really one who, if just to give you kind of like a bit of a spatial way to look at it, is not someone who gets in the way between you and God, but someone who stands behind you, pushing you, helping you get closer to God with your own relationship with God. All right, so that's a little bit about verse 31. Let's continue. Now we have the Song of the Sea. Exodus chapter 15. This is the epic song of the sea. It's poetic. It's metaphorical. It's got a lot of insight and meaning and embedded meaning in it. We're not going to be able to go through all the details. I want to get through it and understand it somewhat on a basic level, but you should know there's tremendous amounts of commentary in it and deeper explanations. But we're gonna wade through the song more on a straightforward level. One thing that I'll mention before we start is, what did I want to mention? Okay, I think I mentioned this yesterday, that this is something we say in our prayers every single day. This Az Yasher, the Song of the Sea. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. When it's written in the Torah, it's written like like poetry. So usually the Torah is written in columns of text. Column, column, column. The column that has the song, the column itself is divided into 3 sections: right, left, center, right, left, center, right, left, center. It's hard to describe, but picture like, I don't know, picture like a block of text, right? A block of text, a normal block of text, but then picture a different type of layout where you have a stanza, and a stanza. And that's how it's written, to evoke the idea that it's not the normal narrative. This is now a song. All right, here we go. Let's jump in. Then Moses and the children of Israel. This was like a musical where everyone broke out into song simultaneously. And according to, it's interesting, according to, there are different opinions as to how they did it. Some say that Moses said the whole song and the people kind of just, agreed. Some say that Moses said it verse by verse. He led the people in song. He said one stanza, and then they said this stanza, and then he did the next, they did the next. And some say, like I was joking before, that, well, it's not a joke, but there is an opinion in the Talmud that the way they did it is that Moses started and everyone somehow channeled the same song, all knew the lyrics and the dance moves, maybe not the dance moves, but they all knew it simultaneously at the same time. All right, let's jump in. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang the song to the Lord, and they spoke, saying, here's, song begins right here. I will sing to the Lord, for very exalted is he. A horse and its rider he cast into the sea. This happens to rhyme, but it's not going to continue to rhyme. Right? I will sing to the Lord, for very exalted is he. A horse and its rider he cast into the sea. The Eternal's strength and his vengeance were my salvation. This is my God, and I will make him a habitation. Wow, it's still rhyming. The God of my father, and I will ascribe to him exaltation. Now, I'm just getting a kick out of how the English here is doing somewhat of a job of rhyming. Doesn't rhyme in the original, in the Hebrew, but it maybe adds another layer here in the English. So one thing that I want to mention, this is my God, I will make him a habitation, the God of my father, and I'll ascribe to him exaltation. So this is a very famous phrase, this is my God. The idea here is that our relationship with God and spirituality and Judaism should be ours. It shouldn't just be that we're in it because it's the God of my father, because, the parents, the Bubby, the Zayda, the old country, so we're guilted into, eating matzah on Passover. That's secondary. The primary is, this is my God. We should all strive for an individual relationship with God. Okay, I'm trying to give an insight on this verse. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. In other words, I'm going deeper into this verse. This verse is talking about a relationship with God on our own terms, but also because for our parents and our predecessors. And what comes first, though, is our own relationship. And this is a message to us in all time, today, in our lives, that we should strive to own our own relationship with God and not just rely on nostalgia. Yeah, Donna, go ahead.
Excuse me. Is this maybe the precursor of communal prayer and repetition?
Could be. It's probably the first time. Yeah, I would say, the first time that there was a communal prayer. Now we know that the prayers, Abraham prayed, Isaac prayed, Jacob prayed, but there's no source, I don't believe there's any indication that people prayed collectively. This may be the first time that a prayer / song was done in a collective fashion. Yeah, very good point. Yeah. All right, let's continue. Verse 3, the song continues. The Lord is a master of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's, and again, there are dozens of commentaries on each word, each verse of the whole Torah, but certainly this, which is, written in a poetic and cryptic fashion. I'm going to highlight a few, but we're going to primarily go through it. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea, and the elite of his officers sank in the Red Sea. The depths covered them. They descended into the depths like a stone. Verse 6. Your right hand, O Lord, is most powerful. Your right hand, O Lord, crushes the foe. By the way, this idea of right hand, just to clarify, there is anthropomorphism, human-esque language ascribed to God in Torah. But the commentaries clarify that we're not meant to picture God as a human being. Even though it talks about God's right hand, right? His outstretched arm, right? God doesn't have a hand. God doesn't have an arm. God is God. What it means is, just like someone who rescues someone would rescue, by schlepping them, let's say by the hand or with their arm, so too we metaphorically talk about God rescuing the Jewish people with the right hand. And well, actually, this right hand is not the rescue as much as it is the punishment of the Egyptians. Either way, just to clarify, we're not saying God has a hand, but it's using kind of poetic language, poetic license in this description. Maimonides famously speaks about this at length, about not being confused or misled by this type of language in Scripture. Let's continue. And with great pride, you tear down those who rise up against you. You send forth your burning wrath. It devours them like straw. Now, this sounds like, some fire and brimstone. And I mean, that is the simple explanation here. Of course, there are other ways to learn it and to understand it. But on a simple level, it's saying don't mess with God. Don't mess with God's people. And with the breath of your nostrils, the waters were heaped up. The running water stood erect like a wall. The depths congealed in the heart of the sea. Verse 9. Because my enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will share my booty. My desire will be filled from them. I will draw my sword. My hand will impoverish them. Right? That's what the Egyptians said, that they're going to pursue, overtake, right? Take the spoils and share it, etc. That's what the enemy said. You blew with your wind. Oh, sorry. That's kind of giving a rationale for verse 8, right? Why did God's wrath burn, etc., and burn them up like straw? It's because the enemy said such and such. The enemy was vindictive and vicious in its aim, in its desire to pursue and destroy the Jewish people. So that's why, again, verse 8, God intervened. Again, all of this is the song that the Jews are singing in thanksgiving for their salvation. You blew with your wind. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the powerful waters. Who is like you? Mi chamocha ba'elam Hashem. Who is like you among the powerful, O Lord? By the way, this rhetorical question, like, who's as strong as you, God? That rhetorical question famously was the battle cry of who? Who's got it? Who used this as a battle cry? Mi chamocha ba'elam Hashem. The Maccabees. In fact, Maccabee, the Maccabees of the Hanukkah story? Yes? The Maccabees, the ones who fought the Greeks, Hanukkah. Maccabee is an acronym. Mi, Kamocha, Ba'elim, Hashem. Those four letters. Mem, Chaf, Bet, Yud spells Ma-ka-bi. You see that? Ma-ka-bi. Ma, that's the M, Ka, Be, E. Maccabee, right there. So the word Maccabee comes from Mi, Chamocha, or Kamocha, Ba'elam Hashem. Who is like you among the powerful, O Lord? And the Maccabees very intentionally had that as their battle cry. It was about their own strength, but it was channeling God's strength and God's salvation. Let's continue. Who is like you, powerful in the holy place, too awesome for praises, performing wonders? You inclined your right hand, the earth swallowed them up. With your loving kindness, you led the people you redeemed. You led them with your might to your holy abode. Peoples heard. It's part of the song. They're talking about the news coverage that was going to happen, but they're writing it as though it already happened. Peoples heard, they trembled. A shudder seized the inhabitants of Philistia, the Philistines. Then the chieftains of Edom were startled. As for the powerful men of Moab, trembling seized them. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted. Again, this was right after the splitting of the sea. I don't know if anybody shared the tweet about what was going on. I don't know if it hit the media, world media coverage, but it's kind of about projecting what was going to be the reaction of the other nations. They would all be filled with this awe and respect for the children of Israel for what happened. May dread and fright fall upon them. With the arm of your greatness, may they become as still a stone until your people cross over, O Lord, until this nation that you have acquired crosses over. Crosses over, I probably don't need to clarify, but that means into the promised land. And what it means is, may this exodus from Egypt and the splitting of the sea and the demise of the Egyptians, may that instill an awe and respect of God and the children of Israel to the other nations that might otherwise consider getting in the way of crossing over. Does that make sense? Yeah, in case anybody thinks to start trying, may this pave the way for a smooth transition. You shall bring them and plant them on the mount of your heritage, referring to the Jewish people, directed toward your habitation, which you made, O Lord, the sanctuary, Lord, which your hands founded. This is referring to Israel and Jerusalem and the temple, etc. And then the song turns and says, the Lord will reign to all eternity. Hashem yimloch la'olam va'ed. Very famous phrase that we recite in our prayers as well. When Pharaoh's horses came with his chariots and his horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought the waters of the sea back upon them, and the children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. I want to end that as a sentence. I want to end that as a sentence. I know there's a comma here, but I want to just kind of self-contain that, because I think verse 20 is kind of starting a new element. So this ends the song at the sea that the people sang with Moses. And it was sung when the horses of Pharaoh and the chariots went into the sea, and the Jews walked on dry land. All right, that concludes this the story of the song and the context of the song at the sea, thanking God for the salvation, the miracle, the deliverance. Now the Torah says something interesting. Miriam, the prophetess, not only, Donna, is this the source of communal prayer, perhaps for the first time, but it's also the source for somewhat of a mechitza. Because look, it says that there was a separate song for the women. It says Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women came out after her with timbrels and with dances. So according to the way this is understood, that Moses led the song for the men, and Miriam led the same song for the women. But when it came to the song of the women, they added musical instruments and they added dances. In other words, the men just sang. The women added instruments and movement as well to the experience. And that was their way of thanking God. But both the men and the women amongst the children of Israel, both sang the song, both in thanksgiving for the great miracle. A timbrel is what? What's a timbrel? Do we know what a timbrel is? Is that one of those things?
Like a tambourine?
Like a tambourine. I think it's I think it's like a tambourine. That was
what we usually associate Miriam with.
Right. Yeah. Miriam and the tambourine. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that is the second song, or the simultaneous song that Miriam led. Oh, I'm sorry. And here it is. And Miriam called out to them, to the women that she led, sing to the Lord, for very exalted is he, a horse and its rider he cast into the sea, ... In other words, the Torah doesn't say the song again. It just starts it off telling us that the women sang essentially the identical song with the instrument and the dances. Let's continue. All right, so that's the end of the song for both the men and the women. And at this point, the Torah's narrative, if you open up a Torah scroll, the Torah text would go back to just being the block of text. All right, Moses I got to share something here in a moment. Moses led Israel away from the Red Sea, and they went out into the desert of Shur, and they walked for 3 days in the desert, but they did not find water. Okay, we're about to get into some fetching with water, but before we do that, this phrase, Moses led Israel away from the Red Sea, in the Hebrew, it's Vayasa Moshe, which our sages say means not only did he lead them away from the sea, but he had to force them away from the sea. Let's go. We got to move on. The camp is moving out away from the sea. Why were they stuck by the sea? Why didn't they want to move? Listen to this. Our sages tell us the following. When the Egyptians chased the Jewish people, they brought out any and all of the wealth that they had, gold and silver and jewelry and gems, everything they brought out, and they adorned their chariots. They thought they were going to be successful. They went out with bling. They went out with all of their wealth. And when they drowned, all of that wealth went into the water. And then what happened? You know what happens with water, right? The tides, right? I'm picturing an ocean. I don't know if it's the same with the sea, whatever. This is what it says, that all of the wealth washed up onto the shore, not this shore, the shore. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know how to spell it. Whatever. S-H-R-E, right? That shore. It went up, it washed up on shore. And the Jews were collecting the gold and the silver, etc., from the Egyptians. And Moses had to tell them, guys, Genugshain, enough. You got enough. It's time to go. They wanted to collect. Why did they want to collect? On a simple level, who wouldn't want to take the riches? But on a deeper level, it's not about the money. It was about the idea of a spiritual, well, it was about the money, but it was about utilizing it for a spiritual transformation, ultimately to build the Holy Temple, the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, a sanctuary for God. It was about taking the resources and transforming. So although they had good intentions this is obviously from a more mystical understanding of it, nonetheless, Moses still led them away, because even if you have, as the Rebbe points this out, even if you have a good intention, a spiritual intention, if God tells you to move, you move. If there's a calling, there's a calling. But I'm in the middle of something else that I think is very important, and I think that it's also very spiritual and very holy. If there's a calling, if God calls on you, you got to move, and you drop whatever your calculation is of what's holy at that moment. All right, that is a little bit of insight into verse 22. Now, the end of that verse is they were traveling and they didn't find water. They basically ran out of the resources that they took from Egypt. They ran out of water, and now they were thirsty. Verse 23, they came to Marah, but they could not drink water from Marah because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. You know, like marar, like the bitter herbs. Marah means bitter. So they came to this place called Marah, which was named maybe because the waters were bitter. They couldn't drink from the water. It was too bitter to drink. So the people complained. Verse 24, the fetching begins. The people, well, it began a little bit before when they were faced with the first crisis of the Egyptians advancing. But here we have the next complaint. The people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Right? There's no seltzer. There's no water. Nothing. What are we supposed to drink? So he cried out. So Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord instructed him concerning a piece of wood, which he cast into the water, and the water became sweet. This is the source of sweet water, right? The waters became sweet. Just saying. All right. There he gave them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them. So they got mitzvot at Marah, at that place, a statute and an ordinance. There were mitzvot, including Shabbat, the observance of Shabbat, that was given to them at that stop. And he tested them to see whether they would be faithful, that they would be provided water, or they would panic. Did they pass the test or not? Probably not 100%. They were complaining. And God said the following: if you hearken to the voice of the Lord, your God, and you do what is proper in his eyes, and you listen closely to his commandments and observe all his statutes, then all the sicknesses that I have visited upon Egypt, I will not visit upon you. That's a great blessing, right? God says, if you stick with me, you have nothing to worry about. None of what afflicted Egypt will come upon you. For I, the Lord, heal you. Ani Hashem Rofecha, I am your healer. God says, stick with me and you will be okay. Now, I need to mention a few things. I need to mention a few insights. I wanted to go through primarily the story, a long reading today. We had the whole Az Yashar, the song at the sea, so much to talk about. I wanted to go through the basic text. I want to give you a few short insights now in the last few verses. Number one, when they came to Marah, they couldn't drink because it was bitter. What does it mean because it was bitter? They couldn't drink the water because it was bitter. It means what? It means the water, right? They couldn't drink the water because the water was bitter. Not so fast. In the Hebrew, it says they couldn't drink. They couldn't drink the water from Marah. Ki, because Marim Haim, because they were bitter. Haim is plural. They, not it. They were bitter. Now, you could say they still means the waters of Marah, they were bitter. Or you could say they means the people were bitter. Okay? So this becomes a teaching from the mystical tradition that basically says the way we perceive things is the way they actually taste to us. It's not just about the water that we drink, but it's about the lenses that we wear, that we put, the glasses that we put in front of our eyes. If we have a bitter lens, then everything's going to be bitter. If we have a rose-colored lens, everything's going to be beautiful. And of course, life is not either or. There are shades of gray in between, but it's a powerful message about perception and reality. I'll share with you an anecdote. I'm sure it's not a true story, but they say a story. Once, a rabbi in a community was called by somebody looking to move. And they called the rabbi and asked the rabbi, tell me, we're considering moving to your community. What are the people like in your community? The rabbi says, you know what? Tell me about your community that you're currently in. He says, oh, the people are so nice. They're so kind. They're so loving. They're so generous. Everyone takes care of each other. It's a wonderful place to live. We're sorry to go, but we have to move for work or whatever. But the people are wonderful. The rabbi said, it's exactly the same here. The people are wonderful. Oh, thank you very much. Gets a call 5 minutes later from someone else, also looking to move. He says, Rabbi, we're looking to move, thinking about moving. Can you tell me about the community? The rabbi says, tell me about the community that you're currently in. Oh, it's terrible. The people everyone's trying to stab each other in the back and not nice. And basically everyone gossips. The rabbi says the same, unfortunately, it's the same thing over here. What's the message? Message is whatever you experienced in where you are, the message is it's likely because that's your lens. So wherever you go, you're going to encounter people like that, right? If you look around and you see people kind and loving and generous, it's likely because that's how you perceive the world, with a generous attitude. And therefore, wherever you go, you're going to encounter people that are kind, loving, and generous. If you look around and everybody's this and everybody's that, and you're always good and it's never good, then it's not going to be good here either. So again, did the story ever happen? I don't know, but it's a story that's told as kind of like an anecdote, a parable, an insight into the idea of perception creating our own reality. So again, that works on this verse. They couldn't drink the water. Why? Kimarim haim, because they were bitter. If you're bitter, the water's going to taste bitter. That's the works. That's one insight. Final insight is, how did the waters become healed in the story? Moses throws a piece of wood into the water, and that makes it sweet. What's the connection? So I'll share with you one final insight, and then we're going to close out for today. And that is that wood represents Torah, right? Why? Because Torah, we say, Eitz Chaim Hi. Torah is a tree of life. You ever hear the tree of life? Torah is a tree of life. So Torah is likened to a tree of life. Trees are where wood comes from. So again, this is not the literal meaning. It's a more mystical and metaphorical meaning of this verse or of this episode, this story. Moses throwing in a piece of wood into the water is putting Torah into our wisdom, into our ideas. Without Torah, life can feel very bitter. When we cast a piece of wood into the water, when we introduce Torah perspective, a Torah insight into our lives, that can help heal our perceptions and then heal the world that we see with our own eyes. Hope that made sense, and I hope that is meaningful. So, what's the message? Drink Torah, it's the real thing. I think that was once a slogan of Coca-Cola, right? Coke, it's the real thing. So Torah, it's the real sweet thing. No additives, no artificial sweeteners. It's just sweet. It's a perspective, an uplifting. It's a real but an uplifting perspective on life. And of course, all of you have studied lots of Torah and recognize the benefits of a Torah perspective. All right, that is it. That's all I wanted to share today. Well, that's all I have time to share today for right now. Looking forward to picking up tomorrow. Any questions or comments before we close out? Mark, I see you going to the buzzer.
Yeah, I noticed much earlier on that hand, this is almost like the portion which is centered upon a hand. Because first God told Moses to stretch your hand over the sea. And then he says that God saves Israel from the hand of Egypt. And hand was mentioned, I think, 3-4. And yes, Hashem saves Israel from the hand of Egypt with his right hand. So
yes,
hand was
God's hand, right? So we have Moses' hand, the Egyptian's hand, God's hand. You're right. Lots of hands. Yeah. I'll give you a hand for pointing that out. But I'll tell you something. It says something in the Haggadah very interesting about hand. It says regarding the plague of lice, Dam Tzavardei Kinim, plague number 3. It says that we read this 2 weeks ago. It says that the Egyptian sorcerers could not replicate the lice. It was too small for them to do magic and create. So they said, this is not magic. Etzba Elokim hu. It's the finger of God. This is God that did it. We can't replicate. So we're now in respect of what Moses is bringing about with these plagues. So they conceded. They basically tapped out with plague number 3. They said, we can't do this. It's the finger of God. By the splitting of the sea, it talks about the hand of God. So I'm not necessarily addressing your entire point, which I think is a great point, but I'll share with you one insight. It says that what is the ratio of a finger to the hand? Yeah, what's the ratio? 1/5, right? 1/5. So if at the Exodus, there were 10 plagues, at the sea, there were 50 plagues, right? If just like the finger to the hand is 1 to 5. So with regards to the plagues, it talks about the finger of God. By the splitting of the sea, it talks about the hand of God. That means it was 5 times more than the plagues themselves. And the plagues are a big deal. And when it comes to the sea collapsing, the Egyptians, we don't go into detail. It just says It collapsed. But our sages point out, and we read this in the Haggadah, it's open up your Maxwell House edition, you'll see it. It's at the part where people are going through to try to get to the meal, by the way. It's like the end of the discussion where you're like, all right, no, let's get to the food, right? So, but it's in there. It talks about the ratio of finger to hand and 10 to 50. So it says there were upwards of 50 plagues, whatever that means, at the splitting of the sea. What does it mean exactly? What are we talking about? I don't know. But multiple instances of iterations of punishment at the sea. That's what it says. Sandrine.
There's a song of Matityahu, Jerusalem, and he talk about the right hand. So I always wonder,
Yes.
look, so now I know where it comes from.
That's actually from Psalms. Are you familiar with the source from Tehillim?
No.
It's a beautiful.
So it's not from what we read today, the right hand.
It's not from today. No, it's not from today. It actually is from King David. King David writes, King David lived before the temple was built. His son built it. He drew up the designs. His son Solomon, King Solomon, built the temple. But King David was a prophet. So he wrote Psalms that talk about a perspective after the temple's destruction. Are you with me on that? Mm-hmm. Able to see into the future and to talk about the lament of the Jewish people after it will be destroyed. He was envisioning the future and then looking back on a temple that wasn't even built in his lifetime. So it says, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini." If I ever forget, and it's not only him, it's all of us. If I forget Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
right? Tishkach yamini, then may I forget my right hand. In other words, just like I can't forget my right hand, I should never forget about Jerusalem. It's a beautiful line. And that's where Matityahu gets it from. It's from Psalms. It's a really
psalm
beautiful
is that? Which number? Do you know?
Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. Give me a second. Let me go to Rabbi Google. I'll just type it out in the Hebrew. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. It is on Psalms, Psalm 137, I think, according to my crack internet research, very quickly, pulling it up. Psalm 137. Let me just grab a Tillim. I'll be right back.
Me too.
You found it? Oh, you're grabbing one also. Yeah. Let's see if we can find it. I don't have an English one. I have a Hebrew one. 137. Legit. Al Naras Bavel, of course. It's the song. It's the song here. It's right here. 137. It begins Al Naharos Bavel, on the shores of Babylon. Yeshab Gam Bachinu. I'm going to do an impromptu translation. On the shores of Babylon, there we sat and we cried, remembering Zion. This is before Zion. This is before it was built. But again, he was channeling a prophecy of the future of the Jew in exile, crying on the shores of exile in Babylon, Babylonia, Bavel, looking back at what was lost, the temple, Zion, Jerusalem. Zion means Jerusalem, and lamenting that. And part of that is, if I ever forget Jerusalem, may I forget my right hand. In other words, it should be impossible to forget about Jerusalem, about what we had, the temple. You found it? It's right in the middle of that.
Yes. I have it in English and Hebrew. Mm.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's right there, verse 5 of that psalm. All right.
Thank
I think that's it. Pleasure.
All
Good.
right.
Yes.
I just realized something. This Tehillim is what we recite when we bench,
Yeah.
not on Shabbat.
Yeah. It's the weekday paragraph, right, before benching. Yes. Yeah. That's why we don't recite it on Shabbat, because it talks about lamenting exile. So Shabbat, we try to stay in a positive. We don't lament on Shabbat, right? Like, what's his name didn't bowl on Shabbat. We don't lament on Shabbat. Anyway, it's a John Goodman reference. Anyway, good. It's good to see everybody. Have a wonderful day. Barry, it's great to see you.
Tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi. Appreciate it.
Great to see you. Oh, tomorrow, right. So,
Bobby,
sorry,
nice to
tomorrow,
meet
no
you.
DPP. Tomorrow
No,
we're doing JLI. Right. Tomorrow we're JLIing
In person?
in person. Yes. Yes. In person. I think we're gonna have to go indoors tomorrow. It's a little too cold to do outside, so we'll be indoors. But we'll have a big space to camp out in. We'll have it's a smaller crowd, and we should have plenty of space to distance from each other. All right. I look forward to seeing you all either tomorrow or the next day or whatever. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.
Thank
Thank you.
you,
Everybody.
Rabbi. Good day.
All
See you
right.
tomorrow.
Bye.
See you tonight.